asserting patents against their products, and which were put in the waste paper basket. So you can imagine after, when there was a litigation, why didn't you react earlier? Well, we, IP organization, didn't know, and they were not even aware of the risks they were incurring. So I think the basic knowledge is quite enough for them, no more.
So both Ruud and Béatrix work in organizations that have very significant IP components to them and generate a lot of revenue through licensing activities and monetization of intellectual property. Kasim also with Ericsson is in a business that's closely related to standards and those kinds of things. And I think in those kinds of companies, Ian, we see the boards and senior executives get it a lot more. They really do seem to understand it. But so I was going to direct a question to you, Kasim, which is, how do we, in a company like yours where you guys are dealing with essential patents on standards and licensing programs and things like that, obviously there's a lot of dollars attached to intellectual property. And so for the senior executives, they're getting regular reports on licensing activity and revenue generation and those kinds of things. But for companies that are not in IP as a business, if you want to put it that way, do companies need to get sued for $100 million and lose, or in order for the CEO to get attention, or is there another way that we can sort of bring this in sort of really IP-centric kinds of businesses to get senior executives to get this level of awareness of IP?
I think Ruud, I second Ruud on what he said, that you have to speak the language of the board and the management, and they understand basically few things very clear. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. They understand top line, they understand bottom line, they understand cash flow, and the value they have. And as long as you are able to translate this to them, the value of the IP you have, and the value and the risk you have if you hit by litigation, I think that then it's quite clear that they understand it pretty quickly. And then going back to Ian's point, the CEO should know a lot about IP. I think that the parallel, I would say that the CEO should know about IP as much as he knows about actually the technology the company is into. Our CEO, he knows pretty good about what kind of technology we are delivering to the market. Parallel to that, he knows quite a lot about the IPs we have. So that's the level of knowledge, in my opinion.
Mark, you've spent an awful lot of time dealing with boards and senior executives. What's your thought?
One other thing I'd observe is I think Ruud is right on target by placing the responsibility on the IP professionals to be tightly integrated with the business strategies and business functions. And that happens relatively rarely, and there are relatively few organizations that have very business-oriented IP professionals, but there are quite a number. The responsibility lies on the business side as well, and I think one of the observations I'd make in terms of observing strategic planning processes in companies for a couple of decades is that it's very rare that there is an explicit IP strategy in a company, and companies like the ones on the panel are unusual in that they do have executives in charge of IP and explicit IP strategies. But one of the remarkable things is that most companies do have a predictable routine in their businesses. They have something called a strategic plan. That's often an annual process. It often precedes the budgeting process. And most of the companies that do it on a regular basis have some kind of template, some kind of set of guidelines to provide the business heads. They need to talk about the market. They need to talk about the customer needs. They need to talk about shareholder value and major investments that they're making. Sometimes they talk about competition and issues around that. There's often a template and a guide, and it is almost non-existent, the number of templates that I've seen, other than the ones that we've suggested. But the number of templates that you see for these kinds of strategic planning processes that actually have the suggestion that you address IP as an important element of a strategic plan as an important driver of competitive strategy and competitive advantage, the frequency that you see that is it's extremely rare and almost non-existent. And so I think one of the messages that an IP community needs to provide to business leaders is, hey, there's a lot of this is really important to your business. It's really important to your competitive advantage. You're not even thinking about it. It's not even on the curriculum. And the act of even placing it on the template forces a discussion that doesn't happen very often today. And that's a responsibility of the business heads and business leadership. And to the extent that that doesn't happen, I think that's negligence of a major form. So there's responsibility on the IP professionals to speak the language of business. There's also the responsibility of business leaders to be the stewards of the most important assets that the company creates. And that happens too infrequently.
I agree with that, but if you look at the situations where most companies are coming from, you first need to have a push from the IP people to create the awareness and to show them the value. And if they understand it, if they get it, then there will be a pull, because then they will see the benefits for themselves and they want to also manage it and control it and understand it better. And that comes to a situation, at least in our company, that now, today, every strategic document of the business needs also to include an IP paragraph. It's in the template now.
Yeah.
So,
but I think it's a journey, right? It's a journey. I mean, you start, the top management, at the beginning, they don't really understand what's going on with the patents. Why do we need patents? And as long as it is a cost and there is no value clear linked to the top line, bottom line, cash flow, then there is a period where it's just working hard, but there is no clear understanding between the business and the IP. So it's really a journey.
Béatrix, I know that Thomson's gone through an incredible journey that Kasim is talking about, and you might want to share some of that with folks who may not know that story as well.
Yeah, I would like to give my example at Thomson. First of all, Thomson was formed at the end of the 19th century based on patents of an American guy called Thomson, who created a French company, a company in France based on IP. Then, during the century after that, IP was used as a defensive. Well, Thomson had patents, used them only defensively. And there are two examples where this proved to be completely different. And I agree that luck is absolutely needed, as Ruud explained. The first example is the acquisition by Thomson Components in 1985, as far as I remember, of a company called Mostec in the US. And so this company was acquired for something like $75 million. I was part of the Thomson Components team at the time as a lawyer, and we went through the due diligence and so on, and we acquired Mostec and its patents. A few months later, we had a visit from an American company based in Long Island, and they wanted to purchase a few patents from which we had acquired, and we had no clue of their value, and nobody, by the way, had any clue of the value of those patents. Otherwise, they would not have been sold with the business. So we discussed with the company, we identified the patents, we look at them carefully, and we realized that these were essential DRAM patents. So what do? Unfortunately, we don't sell, unfortunately for the potential acquirer, we don't sell the patents, and we launched licensing program. And this has been remarkably successful, and we gained something like 10 times the acquisition price of Mostec. So that was the example of Thomson Components. Now, in 1993, I joined Thomson Multimedia at the time. Turned then to Thomson Consumer. No, it was Thomson Consumer Electronics, turned to Thomson Multimedia, and now is the only Thomson. In 1993, I was hired at N-4. I mean, I report to a guy who was in charge of something like IP and licensing. I was hired as the chief of licensing. This guy reported to a technical guy, I don't remember his title at all, who himself reported to the CTO, and CTO reported to CEO. So you see N-4.